co-host, please. That is amazing. Thank you. Okay, so welcome to the community talk, which is focusing on mental health and the relationship with exercise. We have some really great speakers today. We have partnered with Technogym to be able to produce and deliver this amazing event for you. So Stephen, who is our professor and will be talking today about the relationship between mental health and exercise, but also how it's developed and changed over the years. So we're really excited to have him on board here today. And then we will be moving to a pre-recorded video from Silvano, who is the head of research at Technogym. And then we will be having a roundtable discussion with CRM and Nido, who are leading and striving and really setting the agenda in our industry. And we will also love to hear from you guys as well on your thoughts and what you guys are doing on the ground and have an open and honest conversation. So Stephen, I will hand over to you. Thank you so much for being here today, all the way from the US.
Thanks, Kellyanne. Omar, could I have screen share, please? It's kind of weird. My name is listed under there as Evelyn. She probably doesn't appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's fine. No worries. So from the middle of the heartland of America, welcome. Good morning from me, and I guess it's good afternoon to most of you. As Kellyanne mentioned, I'm going to present some information related to the impact that exercise has on mental health. And I'm going to focus it primarily around a college age, university age population, but in some cases it goes beyond that. So let me jump into this, and the focus of the presentation, or at least what I'm going to try to do here, is to give you some information about what is mental health. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then some definitions for what is physical activity, what is exercise, and how is that different from physical inactivity and sedentary behavior. Then, of course, the main thing is, what is the relationship between activity and health, mental health? And I'm going to focus on that primarily from the standpoints of, as is usually the case with young adults, stress, and then how too much stress leads to anxiety and depression, and then finish up with a discussion about how physical activity could actually perhaps build some resilience against those kinds of mental health issues. And then lastly, just a brief overview on some guidelines perhaps for mental health. So what is mental health? What is mental illness? And this comes from our US Surgeon General's report on mental health. Mental health is, I think, pretty obvious. Being able to just successfully perform, right? Productive activities, having relationships with other people in a fulfilling manner, and then basically having resilience, being able to adapt and cope with adversity or adapt to changes in the things that we're not really expecting to change. Mental illness, and it's not one or the other. So this arrow is meant to depict the continuum of mental health. We try to make sure that we're more towards this end of the continuum, but there are individuals who slide towards the other end. And, beyond just saying that they're all diagnosable mental disorders, these are health conditions that are characterized by things like changes in the way we think or feel. Even our behavior can be impaired when we're distressed unnecessarily. But then there's this kind of middle point of mental health problems, which is kind of a nice signpost. So if we think about it that way, mental health problems are, in a way, they're mental illness light, in not to make light of that, but they're signs and symptoms of mental illness that are just not of sufficient intensity or magnitude, or the symptoms haven't been experienced for a long enough period of time to be diagnosed. So it's called a prodromal period. So these are subthreshold symptoms. But the nice thing about this is, if we can identify these early enough, we can do things to try and either prevent, so we don't have to treat later, and even to better promote things to improve health. So prevention can be aimed at stopping that progression towards mental illness. Now, if we just look at generally some statistics, and I'm not going to get into details here, but you can see if you look at the end of this legend, there is a lot of mental health disorder in the world, not just in any particular country. In some places where we don't see very much, it could very well be either just not having the data, and maybe those are better places to live too, who knows? But it's not a problem for one part of the world. It's really a global issue. And it's a male and female problem. And you can see, we're talking about almost 900 million people, and that was as of 2016. Slightly more females than males experiencing mental health disorders, whether that's a function of females being more likely to seek out help when they're experiencing problems. It's just a lot of people. And then the primary mental illness, mental disorders that we see tend to be the anxiety disorders and depression. And then often we see alcohol use disorders or substance use disorders because, both of these, because people self-medicate as opposed to seeking out treatment. And then just because I'm here in the US, we're talking about a big chunk of our population that are experiencing either a mental illness or even a severe mental illness. So we've got issues that we need to have, that we need to pay attention to. And one way that we might be able to help with that is through, I got ahead of myself, is through physical activity, which I'll come to in a second. What about this age range of 18 to 22, 25 years? This is a report that was fairly recent. It's looking at a decade-long analysis of mental health in a collegiate population. And you can see that depression, anxiety of different types, academic distress hasn't really changed much, but overall distress or stress symptoms, they've all increased over the last 10 years. And that's not just a function of COVID and the lockdown, although that's certainly a part of it. And then if you kind of dive into that a little bit, what are the top concerns? They're anxiety and depression and stress. These are just individual top concerns, but then those are also included among all things that students are dealing with as problems while they're in that kind of age range and on our campuses and trying to survive on a day-to-day basis. All right, so what is physical activity and how is that contrasted with sedentary behavior? And this wheel, this activity wheel, is kind of a nice way of thinking about it. Physical activity is really any skeletal muscular movement that results in expending energy. In a way, what we're doing now could be physical activity, right? We're sitting, most of us, and it could be physically active, but typically we think of sitting as more of a sedentary behavior. Inactivity is physical activity that just doesn't meet physical activity recommendations. In other words, we don't move enough to get much benefit from that movement. And then finally, sedentary behavior is waking behavior, excuse me, that's characterized by not very much energy expenditure. And that's obviously whether we're sitting, reclining, lying down. And you can see some examples of that. We're seeing, especially over the last almost 2 years now, quite a bit more of this sedentary type behavior and not as much physical activity behavior, in large part due to obviously COVID and restrictions on some of the things that we can do. And this is just a reference for that. So, look at this kind of historically, and when we started tracking this differs based on countries, but the UK was one of the first to actually start tracking this in 1961. We followed here from the US in 65, and other countries have followed suit. But the point of this slide is really, and this comes from this time use and physical activity survey, we're talking about huge decreases in the amount of physical activity that we do compared to what we were doing, in some cases, 40, 50 years ago, and in some cases, really only, a few decades ago. And again, this is where we're projected to see physical activity levels by 2030, not that far down the road if we continue on the path that we're on now. And of course, along with that, we're seeing some pretty dramatic changes in our physical health. So what about mental health and exercise? And this guy, Bill Morgan, is really one of the kind of the leaders in this area, started a lot of this work back in the late 60s. And from this paper, Physical Activity and Mental Health, what Morgan said that I found really interesting is that it's, we know that exercise and physical activity is good for our physical health, but it's also equally important to look at how physical activity influences our mental health and what that does to the quality of our life. Mind and body are, in my mind, they're intimately related to one another. Positive mental health obviously can enhance our quality of life, and ill mental health or mental illness can obviously negatively impact on our life quality. So does physical activity help develop mental health? Does it help maintain mental health? And that was where we started. And I think we could all pretty much say, without really having looked at any of the data, the answer to both of these is yes, it can help develop mental health. And yes, it can help maintain mental health once we have achieved it. And there's evidence that there's a relationship in the wrong direction between fitness and psychopathology. In other words, people who are less fit typically have greater degrees of psychopathology, anxiety, depression, et cetera, or they're more likely to develop those sorts of mental illnesses, mental disorders. So, the notion of mens sana in corpore sano, a sound body, a sound mind in a sound body, the Greeks talked about that, eons ago, and we still think that's the case. And yet we see this dramatic decrease in what we're doing in terms of our physical health. And Keith Johnsgaard is a clinical psychologist, and his position is generally that we're genetically predisposed to move. If you look at the way our bodies are designed, we're not designed to be sitting in chairs, sitting in front of screens for long extended periods of time. And when we don't give our bodies what they need, in essence, we're violating that warranty. We have problems, and not just physical, mental as well. So let's take a look at some data. This is from the US over a fairly extensive period of time. It's a large sample, Shakrud's work, and essentially what he's looking at is mental health burden. So individuals were asked to answer this question, thinking about your mental health, which includes stress, depression, and problems with emotions. How many days during the past month, basically, was your mental health not good? So if you look at the entire sample, those who did no exercise had significantly more days in the past month where they had mental health burden, right? They had issues, as opposed to those who did engage in regular exercise. 43% fewer mental health burden days for those who engage. And it didn't matter what they did, sports, cycling, et cetera. It doesn't matter what the activity is. Anything is better than not doing anything. And then if you looked at a subsample of those who had been diagnosed with depression, those who exercised still had benefit from engaging in regular physical activity. And then just in terms of duration and frequency, you can see, not doing anything is the worst, and doing anything is better than nothing. And there really isn't any duration of activity that becomes problematic. Certainly it depends on the amount of time that you have, but any kind of physical activity is going to help with reducing mental health burden. If we look at this on campus, so on our universities and college campuses, this doesn't look all that bad, right? We're seeing, if we look at the dark blue bars over time, so this is from 2008 to 2019, that looks okay, right? I mean, it's 45+%, but that's only 45% of our 18 to 24, 5, 6-year-old students who are engaging in enough physical activity to get benefit from it. They're meeting the recommendations of at least 30 minutes on 5 or more days per week. That's frightening to someone like me. We're not getting even young adults to be able to engage in just the basic amount of physical activity. And when you ask them in the last 30 days, how many hours per week do you spend exercising? More than it's almost what? Almost 60% are getting less than 2 hours per week, not per day, per week. Again, really scary stuff for that age group, because if they're not doing it when they're that age group, it's really hard to change when you get a little bit older. So what stresses our students? And this comes from some work done by Bland and colleagues. It's not surprising, beginning university or college, not really sure what's going to happen, transferring or moving, summer jobs, living conditions, their daily hassles. Of course, as a professor, I hear this all the time: the tests, the exams, the assignments, etc., pressure, and of course, text messaging. And I think we can probably all relate to that one. But then what do they do to cope? Some listen to music, they sleep, they do other kinds of relaxation. But in that entire list of 10 things that students are doing to cope with their stress, exercise is not on the list. It's not even in the top 10. And again, maybe that's why we're not seeing very much in the way of the percentages of our students engaging in regular activity. And why should they? A couple of studies I wanted to highlight because I think they're really interesting, especially for this age group. This was some work done by Bertha von Herren, and I apologize if I say that wrong. They're two different studies, but they're primarily based on the same group of college students. So they had undergraduate engineering students, and I don't know, in Europe and other parts of the world what engineering is like. Here in the U.S., engineering is a really high stress, competitive major to be in. And what these students apparently were willing to engage in this particular study. They were either randomly assigned to an exercise intervention or put on a waiting list. And not surprisingly, those that did the exercise intervention improved their aerobic capacity. That's what VO2 max stands for. And those that were waitlisted, their aerobic capacity decreased, unfortunately. The interesting part about this to me is the stressor that they looked at was during university exams, they were willing to be tested or have data collected. And in terms of their emotional reactivity, the exercise group had less of that reactivity after this 20-week aerobic exercise training intervention, whether they were asked based on their self-reported stress or whether it was based on heart rate variability, which is an index of how variable our heartbeats are. And with this particular metric, higher values are actually typically reflecting a better stress response. So evidence that exercise can help dealing with, and this is not laboratory contrived stressors, these are real stressors for students in university. Gerber's work has looked at this as well. And the interesting thing about this is it brings in this notion of how much activity do we need in terms of intensity. And again, done with college students, male and female, they got lots of different data, including self-reported stress, and then looking at how much physical activity they engaged in with the device. That's what the accelerometer is. And what they really wanted to look at was the combination of perceived stress and vigorous physical activity. So essentially what they showed was that those students who experienced high stress but didn't get much vigorous physical activity had a fairly large increase in a stress hormone called cortisol. They also recovered more slowly, meaning the way I think of that is they're basically dealing with the stressor even when it's no longer present. Their body is still processing that stressor. They also had more anxiety and negative mood states, as opposed to those students who also experienced high stress but engaged in what they considered a sufficient amount of vigorous physical activity. They responded much more positively. Their recovery was 30 minutes shorter, which is really good in terms of not having that much of this stress hormone floating around in our system. And it suggests that not just physical activity, but including some degree of vigorous intensity activity could be a stress buffering approach that we might want to try and incorporate with our population, not just with college students, because that's what this is, but maybe with everybody. Another look at this same sort of thing in Gerber's work, and let me just put this all in here so you can read it while I chat. Same students, and again, they're looking at those who are getting at least 20 minutes or more of vigorous activity. So this is just showing the previous slide again, except now they're looking at how does this affect depression? The Beck Depression Inventory is a pretty commonly used metric, and you can see that under low stress, those who perceive low stress, it doesn't make much difference, but those who are getting more than 20 minutes of vigorous physical activity are still reporting lower levels of depression. It really matters in those who are under high stress. Getting that extra vigorous activity is beneficial in preventing higher levels of depression. And the same thing happens with insomnia, right? Inability to sleep because of stress. Those who are getting that vigorous physical activity are experiencing much less of that insomnia. There's lots of evidence, and I'm just putting these on here. I'm not going to talk about any one of these in particular, and this is just a very small sample. There is lots and lots and lots of evidence that physical activity and exercise can either prevent anxiety and depression. It can be a treatment when anxiety and depression are being experienced, and it's been done in college-age students, middle-aged adults, young adults, middle-aged adults, older adults, males, females, all kinds of exercise and physical activity. The evidence is in some ways almost overwhelming. We have lots and lots of evidence that physical activity is really helpful for mental health. One of the things about it, and getting towards the end of my presentation, this notion of resilience, and this has been called lots of things. It started out as hardiness, and I think sometimes it's referred to now as grit. But resilience defined here is just the ability to withstand stressors, recover from them, or even kind of thrive in the face of stressors and the ever-changing demands that we encounter. And it's very likely that physical activity and exercise can contribute to resilience, in part because of exercise strengthens brain structure and thus brain function, which can lead to that resilience. So in essence, enhancing the way that we kind of are able to regulate our emotions, and to the extent that we can do that effectively, we can decrease our risk for mental health problems. So to finish off, guidelines and recommendations, this work again, colleagues around the world talking about, do we need guidelines, not just for physical health, but for mental health? So what do we know based on this at this point? And essentially it says we need to consider both prevention and promotion. So we want to prevent mental illness or mental ill-being, and then also promote mental well-being, and physical activity can be useful in that regard. Doing activity in our leisure time or even in travel, I should have highlighted this more, we have to figure out for ourselves, what is it that we enjoy doing? You know, jumping rope can be a very useful physical activity if that's something you like to do. And if you like it, you're more likely to continue doing it. So some activity is better than nothing. You know, I think we've been very poor in the field of kinesiology and exercise science in our messaging. And I think what we've come on now, which is from our latest guideline analyses, is we just need to move more and sit less. I think that's a message that people can really understand. But, you know, given our age group, again, I think it's not just moving more. That's a good starting point. But then trying to incorporate some increased level of vigorous activity could even be more beneficial for dealing with the kinds of stressors that our 18 to 25-year-olds typically experience. So we can really play an important role in mental health if we can get more of our population, especially our younger portion of our population, to engage in more physical activity, not just for physical health, but also for their mental health. So I'll stop there. I know that there may be some questions. We'll entertain those, I think, at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Kellyanne.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Wow, there was so much information in there. And I tell you what, it really made me check my own lifestyle, never mind thinking about the bigger picture. Yes, so we're going to go straight into the Techno Gym talk now with Salvano, who's coming from a research perspective, just because they're the people who are building the equipment to get people moving, and he's going to give some insight on analysis and research that they have been working on too. So I hope you enjoy.
With the professor Petrocello, how exercise can be considered important for the general well-being. And with this brief presentation, I would like to focus to some interesting and basic question I would like to say. So I'll try to give you some simple answer. First of all, what is wellness? So what is general well-being? Here you see the so-called the wellness pyramid, because here in Technology we name ourselves the wellness company, and this is a word, wellness, that we have been using since decades, I would say. And normally we represent wellness with this pyramid, where you see three pillars: movement, nutrition, and mental approach. So the psychological component. And it is clear, and I can say that there is a general agreement on that all of those three pillars are fundamental, and there is an interplay within those pillars. It is clear that I cannot take care only of movement if I don't eat properly and if I do not have a proper mental approach. At the same time, I cannot just think about nutrition if I'm completely sedentary and without a positive attitude towards life. So if my psychological component is not positive, let me say. So a successful organization should offer a comprehensive approach towards movement, nutrition, and the psychological component, knowing that there is really a strong interplay between those components. Then let's focus a little bit on movement. And here you see a classification of what movement is. It's a general classification which is well known by experts based on, let me say, a lot of scientific literature. And we could say that when we talk about movement, we should make a distinction between physical activity, exercise, and sport. What is physical activity? Physical activity is any type of movement that we can do on a daily basis. Taking the stairs, walking the dog. This is physical activity. Moving around, hanging around, this is physical activity. Then exercise is a structured way of doing physical activity. It's structured because it's purposive. There is a goal behind. The goal could be toning the glutes, or improving the pectorals, or lowering the blood pressure, or improving your best on a marathon run. And there are some rules to be followed that are the type of activity, either aerobic or resistance training, number of repetitions, number of times per week, etc. And then we know what sports is. And now the question is, which is the best type of movement? What should I do? Physical activity, exercise, or sport? And the answer is very simple: everything. And the golden rule of a perfect health is that of being physically active every day, and twice a week, better 3 times a week, having some spikes of more intense movement represented by exercise or sport. Again, the answer, if we think about our organization, what should we offer? But at the same time, what should we do as a single person? We should be active every day, and again, 2 or 3 times a week, we should have the spikes of more intense exercises or sport, and our organizations, our institutions should offer the possibility of being physically active and the possibility of doing exercise or sport. This is the best solution. And there's a lot of scientific literature behind that supporting what I'm saying. Now, another interesting question: who benefit the most from being or becoming physically active? And the answer is those that are inactive or low active. In this graph, you see some bars. The yellow bars represent the risk in terms of health risk of those that are low active or completely inactive. In this case, as you can see, the bar, the height of the bar is very high, which means that the risk can be high. It is well known that the more sedentary you are, the higher the risk of having some health condition. But the beauty, the great message of this graph is that if you move from a state of low physical activity to a state of moderate physical activity, you have a great reduction of your risk. Or let's put in positive, you have a lot of benefits in terms of health, physical health, and in terms also of mental health. Then, if you become from moderately active to very, very high active, a very high active individual, you still have benefits, obviously, but not as big as for those that move from a state of low physical activity to a state of moderate physical activity. So again, the message is an institution, university, school, housing school, etc., should be focused not only on those that are already highly active, because they ask for physical activity, they ask for exercise, they ask for gym, but we should be focused also, not only, but also on those that are very low active, because those people can obtain a really significant benefits, and those people, if they start in being active, they will be grateful to the organization itself. Other questions. So where the students should move, since that here we are talking mainly about students. The answer seems quite simple. So let's organize a big gym. Let's organize a very well equipped second gym with here you can see the aerobic machines, so treadmill, elliptical, bicycle, rower, and then some strength machine, either body weight, dumbbells, or weight machine or selectorized machine. This is a perfect solution that fits many individuals, mainly those that are already active if the facility is not supervised. But if you want to attract those that are low active, you need to provide some sort of supervision or some professional that can guide the low active people. But as I'm speaking, some of you could say, okay, but to have something like that, I need to have spaces, I need investments, etc. And you are right. If you have it, it's fantastic. It's fantastic because it creates, let me see, a gap between an institution which is equipped with a good gym compared with others that do not have some facilities. But even if you don't have the spaces, there are other solutions. Exercise, even sport, can be done, mainly exercise, even in limited spaces. You just need your bedroom, you just need a corner within your facility, and if you know what you can do, what you can put, what you can propose, you can offer some very interesting solutions to your client, to your students, to your clients overall, to do physical activity and exercise. And obviously, as Second Gym, we are here to help you in design those spaces, those corners. And we shouldn't forget that now there is an incredible interest in a technological way of doing exercise, which is thanks to web-based application. Now with a simple app, we have launched a couple of months ago a very successful app, which is based on 30 years of innovation, which is called the Continuum app. On those apps, you can, on your own, select among hundreds of sessions, 100 of exercise programs divided into different goals, fitness, sport, even health. What do you need? You need some simple tools. In this case, you see a device which is called the Continuum bench, which is equipped by elastic, some weight, some other functional stuff. Or even better, in some situation, you just need your body. So there are a lot of sessions based on body weight exercises. There are programs that do not require anything. So as you can see, the spectrum of possibilities for being physically active is very wide. And here at Technology, we believe on that. We believe that we need to offer the wider spectrum of possibility to help people to become physically active. Obviously, we sell solutions, we sell products, we sell technology, we provide technology. We believe that we need to offer solutions for everybody in every condition. And we shouldn't forget what happens outside, because movement can be done even outside. So what I'm showing to you represent the concept that we call the wellness on the go. Wellness on the go means that we need to be wellness, and we can be wellness everywhere. At home, at the gym, at the university, in the student's home, everywhere when we travel. What do we need? We need an ecosystem. We need somebody who can help us. And this is what we do. This is our mission, which is that of helping people in being physically active, in becoming physically active, in improving their level of activities through technology, which is constituted by equipment and physical equipment, and even the technology represented by app, the cloud, etc. So my final statement is that a successful organization, as your organization, takes care of the wellness of their clients. And wellness, to be achieved, needs different components. Needs the nutritional component, the mental health component, and the movement component. And what we should do, what we believe on that, is that we can create an environment, an ecosystem, where being physically active becomes easier. We know that eating properly is difficult. Moving on a regular basis is not always easy, especially for beginners. So creating a built environment, a positive built environment, which create the condition for making easy, healthy choices. I give you an example. If you don't have fries on your canteen, people do not eat fries. If you have just good olive oil, they will use good olive oil. I'm just talking about nutrition. On the other side, let's move to exercise. If you provide a well-equipped gym, you will see an increasing number of people that could go to the gym. If you provide a map for the running path out of the student's home, probably it will be easier to have people that go outside. If you use an app like the Technology app, where you create challenges among students where they compete against to see who's the most active. Then you create also prizes for the most active. If you create corners where people can move with a project behind, I think that you will have healthy students and happier students and more happy students. So if you have some questions, feel free to contact me. This is my email, and me and my colleague, obviously, we will be very happy to answer to your questions. So bye, and let's have a great event.
So thank you so much for Silvano for recording that. He is actually jet setting across the country, so he couldn't be with us, which is why it's pre-recorded. But I think there's loads of really important things in there, especially on the back of what Stephen was saying about kind of taking responsibility of your own health and well-being and being physically active. But I found it quite interesting when Silvano was saying kind of who benefits from that and was talking about the person. But I 100% think that's extended into the wider community, the university, and for our providers as well, whether that makes it easier to run a building, whether it means that you have better reputation as people are going out and sharing how great your building is and how it's run. So I think there is obviously other benefits as well. Of course, it's also important to, from a duty of care for those people living in your building. I'd like to quickly bring in Omar, who is just going to give a few stats update on our newest piece of research. And then, as I mentioned in the chat, we'll be running 15 minutes over to delve even deeper into what's happening operationally on the ground. Thanks, Omar.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about what we've been doing lately in terms of research on student well-being and its relationship to student accommodation. The Dutch government's been looking into the relationship between people's living situations and their well-being for the last couple of years, and we at the Class Foundation really wanted to target this research by honing in specifically on students and student accommodation. To do this, we partnered up with the ABF research team to kick off the Student Well-being Survey. First, we wanted to see whether certain facilities and services positively impacted student well-being. We also wanted to figure out which students had the best living experience on average, and the results were pretty interesting. We used the Mental Health Inventory 5, which is an international standard for measuring mental health. Basically, we asked 5 questions related to how students felt within the last 4 weeks. Based on their responses, we calculated an average score between 0, very unhealthy, and 100, perfectly healthy. If students got a score of 60 or higher, they were considered psychologically healthy. Anything below 60 was under the threshold and considered psychologically unhealthy. In total, 1,993, so 1,993 students were surveyed. The average score on the MHI-5 came out to 58.6, which was below the threshold of psychological healthiness. This number was even lower for international students who were more likely to self-identify as very nervous, downhearted and low, or so down in the dumps that nothing could cheer them up. We also noticed that the score got lower as students progressed through their education. Older students were typically unhappier than younger students. Earlier in this talk, Dr. Petrozzulo talked about how mental health burden increased when students didn't exercise at all. Stress, depression, and anxiety and insomnia increased when one had a sedentary lifestyle. On the other hand, those who exercised and engaged in regular physical activity of any kind saw huge benefits in reducing anxiety and depression. Our own data really backs this up. When we zoom in and look at how different services and amenities affected the MHI-5 score, we saw a significant jump, almost 3 points on average, when students had access to a gym, relaxation areas, swimming pools, and other communal spaces where they could meet up and be present in their bodies. Similarly, living experience ratings increased when students could access these shared facilities. So far, we've only really done this research with Dutch and international students studying within the Netherlands. However, in months and years to come, we'd love to expand this research on a European-wide level. Thank you so much, everyone, and back to Kellyanne.
Thank you so much, Omar. So obviously that was just a snippet of some of the research that we've been doing, but obviously really positive for our community and yeah, the kind of hard work that we're putting in from PBSA providers and operators who are trying to build these kind of sense of communities and healthier communities and the way that they interact with the immunities and beyond. So I would really love for CRM and Nido to tell us a little bit about what's happening on the ground and the relationship that they believe is happening within their building between kind of mental health exercise and the community. So Richard, who is the CEO of CRM, would you like to kind of go first and talk about what's happening on the ground?
Yeah, thanks, Kellyanne. Very interesting to sort of hear all the presentations so far and sort of get some views as to the link. I think from our point of view on the ground, we run a lot of different schemes, and therefore sort of some of those schemes have the physical space for us to provide quite a lot of sort of gym space or class space, whereas others we're probably a little bit more challenged as to what we can do. But I think the key thing that we want to do is it's about facilitation. In the presentations that we saw, students have a chance to do that through university, through clubs, through sports clubs, through activities there. But I guess as a accommodation provider and operator, it's making sure that if we can facilitate that for our residents and give them access to it. Each year for each site, we try and put a program together for all the residents, and that will vary very much from scheme to scheme. But that is giving, again, access to programs that students can participate in. But what we try not to do, we don't want it to be forced fun. So this is what's happening. You have to come and join in. I think that doesn't work. But it's just giving people a chance to actually be involved in it. And I think one of the key things that drives that, I know, Kellyanne, we were talking about this last week, but we try and keep in touch with our students and hear what do they want. So whether that be by, I guess, more formal surveys or just ad hoc stuff as we speak to them in reception in the mornings, but trying to make sure that we can, respond to what they want and give them access to things that will get them involved, get them moving, and get them sort of actively engaged with other students in our schemes. I think the other thing I'd just add, and then I'll hand back to you, but stating the obvious, I think the pandemic of the last 18 months has really forced this issue. I know it's been tough for all operators through the last 18 months in terms of students that have either not been able to make it to university, or if they have, they've had to isolate or not be very active. So I think, as we get students back for this coming academic year, we're going to have to play an even bigger role than normal in terms of helping that agenda of getting people active and making sure their mental health is in good a state as we can help, really.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And also as well, CRM's cohort is, there's a large proportion of international students there. So I bet there is a kind of lot of worry and anxiety around arriving this year, after everything that's happened over the last couple of years as well. So it's really good to hear that there's kind of programs being set up. I know we discussed in our meeting kind of cultural students taking the opportunity to maybe share their cultures, what maybe around certain times that are important to them, and sharing that in the community to make them feel at home and at ease. But yeah, so thank you so much for sharing. Darren, I would love to kind of hear about obviously how you're approaching kind of mental health, exercise, and building a community. And also how you're doing that from an organizational strategy point of view, through measuring and maintaining it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I suppose I don't want to cover the ground that's being covered, but the link between good mental health and exercise is clear to see, whether it be in an organization like ourselves, running a business and running that business day to day. And especially over the pandemic times where we haven't been in the office and we've all been working from home, basically almost sat eating donuts around Zoom calls all day. And you can see the effect of that very quickly, on people's moods, B, on their motivation, and C, on them just actually, getting that drive to get things done in very challenging times. So it was very quick, and prior to that, we were always trying to do things as a community, as a business ourselves, to promote, a healthy lifestyle equals good mental health. And because we're so close to our student cohort, I think that, you know, the mental health agenda has been around and spoken about reasonably well for probably the last 5 years. 10 years ago, it probably wasn't. I think people were told to just rock up to university and man up and deal with it. And, you know, it was very clear, and I think the university started to realize we had a big problem on our hands, because as people were traveling, especially the international students, the level of stress that they were under, depending on where they came from and what they were doing, was very high. You couple that with the expectations of their parents to get good grades, because a lot of the students, especially from certain countries, are almost looked at as pension funds for the parents and the grandparents to actually come back and earn a living, to keep people you know, going into their old age. And with that comes a lot of pressure, coming to a new country, coming to a new environment, a new culture, and all these things build. And we saw a direct correlation between, you know, dealing with universities, picking up the kind of signposting when people are struggling, and actually providing facilities for people to either have the opportunity to just blow off steam. And as Richard was saying, you know, in a lot of our schemes, we're fortunate enough to work with the investors to try and make sure, you know, if we're in a development point of view, that they design the properties that are fit for students. And that's not just the living quarters, but it's the social and amenities that are there. And if you take the kind of you know, phase one student accommodation, it doesn't take any of that into consideration. If you look at the latest generation of student housing, it's amazing. I think all of us would be very much surprised if you walked into the latest generation with the kind of investors who are interested in the holistic well-being of the occupants, because what you will find there is a number of social spaces. You'll find outdoor space, whether it be you know, on the roof or outside, and you'll find, you know, health facilities, and all those things help to do a number of things. It drives the occupancy of the properties, so you definitely see more interest, and that's because people make decisions for their children, or indeed the students themselves will pick based on the amenities that are on offer. And as we've grown and we work with the students, and we've provided these spaces, you see them being used. And then there's the kind of gentle pressure that we like to call it, and it's important to have a bit of gentle pressure, because the motivated students will, as Silvana was saying, they'll hit the gym every day. And then you've got the kind of quiet ones who probably intimidated going into a gym, and we found that very quickly. So we started to initiate things, you know, and the pandemic did help in a way, because it allowed us to do community things. So we did a huge Instagram program where we got people to try different things, whether it was yoga, whether it was a HIIT course, whether it was boxercise, all done from the comfort of your room or a small space. And then as soon as we could, we kind of got them together. And then when they got together and they all could do yoga together, they felt more confident, and they kind of moved from the, let's say, less sedentary exercise, so just the kind of low impact, to the high impact. And it's very important that we play that role, and we ensure that exercise isn't just seen for, you know, the people who are elite, and the guys that are, you know, hammering 10 miles every single day, or, you know, riding the treadmill with a huge amount of sweat around it. And that is very intimidating. So we work on trying to make sure we get a staged approach, and ultimately with the community, and sometimes that is, you know, we have little competitions, as Richard was saying, you know, and whether it's a Halloween witch hunt that you might do, but very quickly into a cookery class, so people can understand, you know, that, you know, what other cultures are doing, but move that into then, okay, let's physically do something together, and it's been very popular. We've still got a long way to go, don't get me wrong. However, the link between, you know, healthy body, healthy mind is something that we champion. It's one of our values. And we see a huge benefit from that. And we've also done certain things like charity events and working with the community, where people will do something. And the students or the cohort, the youngsters these days, are very interested in contributing to the community or the environment at large. So what we found is if you do a run for, for a certain purpose, they will get involved. And it's using that, the kind of digital natives, using that, using I suppose the platform in which they are used to communicating in, to kind of say, be part of something, build that around an activity, and they get involved. So many different things that we do. As I say, the trend has definitely moved away from just having a gym with weights, to kind of moving to more cardio, to moving to more, Pilates, yoga, I suppose group classes, but getting people involved. So we've spent a lot of time doing that, and it's clear. And the other really interesting thing is, doesn't matter where you do it, whether we're doing it in Netherlands or Germany or Portugal or Spain or the UK, or the people are from anywhere in the world. Partaking in activity together builds the community, improves their mental health, gives them an opportunity to talk to like-minded people. Ultimately, that then helps them share issues and problems, and it reduces stress. That means when they go to university, they do better in their work. And also when they come back to the residence, given that we probably see them more, obviously not when they're going out, but we see them sometimes more than the universities do, because we see them on a daily basis. So helping and aiding them in that kind of physical and mental period is something that we hold very close to our mission.
Thank you so much, Darren. Yeah, really interesting to hear about what you're doing on the grounds and how you're approaching that. I'm particularly interested in something that you picked up about explaining that actually being involved with the development and the design stages is really important to you as an operator, and how you manage that building and how the people live in that building, which for me just makes sense. But I know before that never happened. But also as well, getting service providers such as Techno Gym or Solco Systems, I see Christine in the corner there, getting them involved with the design stages to make sure the building works properly and is future-proof for the people living in it.
Absolutely, yes. We try and bring all the stakeholders around the table. And Techno Gym are very good at providing a floor plan. So as Silvana was saying, whether you've got a corner of an office space to use, or you've got a very luxurious space that you can kind of put everything in, from a running track, they can provide the input into that very quickly. But the key is getting involved at the beginning. Because as all investors know, as well as, because ultimately these are businesses and they need to, they do need to be profitable. But retrofitting this stuff in is incredibly expensive, disruptive, and quite challenging to the business case, because investors don't see the link. So what we do generally is we have a very good ratio where we allow a percentage of the overall space that needs to be dedicated to these spaces. And as soon as you explain it and you walk the investors through, they're very up for it.
Yeah, I think just in terms of, as Darren has explained, it's such an important part of, for all of us in PBSA, that consultation stage in terms of building it. It may not have been the case a number of years back, but I think for most of the providers now, it's a crucial part of the design of the building. As Darren has alluded to, it's what students look for. There's such a number of options available to them as to what their accommodation could look like. So you have to provide very much the facilities that are needed going forward. As Darren has sort of mentioned, whether it be people like Techno Gym who can sort of give you sort of bespoke areas in terms of using, we would take a similar approach that looks at a ratio between sort of social areas, whether that be specifically for class studios, whether it be gyms or whether it be communal areas. There's so many things you can do these days. I mean, we have a property that that we have on our books that has got a basketball court as part of the facilities. Now, that's quite niche, but for some students that's a bit of a wow factor that said, crikey, where I live, we have a basketball court. So yeah, I think it's changing hugely. I think it will change going forward, but that consultation part with the developers is such a key part now to make sure you get that right. And I completely agree with Darren that says you don't want to retrofit that. Yeah, it has to be part of the design to get it right first time, really.
Yeah, I guess that's easier said than done, though. There's already lots of buildings that are, student accommodations that unfortunately just will need refitting. But I do agree that kind of these new builds that are coming online, it's really important we get it right first time. Okay, great. I wanted to ask if the audience had any questions for Stephen, Darren, or Richard. I'm sure somebody has one pondering question. Exactly, Darren. Anybody? Stephen, did you want to come in and kind of, put in your what your thoughts are on what's happening in Europe and operationally, and well, I know you mentioned some of the trends, the recommendations. Do you think from what Darren and Richard are saying, this kind of aligns with what you're wanting to see? Actually,
I was really excited to hear about what Darren and Richard are doing. Just putting treadmills or weight equipment in a room in an apartment building isn't going to be what everybody is going to gravitate towards. It's not like I really like the approach of providing various opportunities, outdoor spaces, and not just for what we think of as exercise, but even for just being able to get out in nature and enjoy some quiet or fresh air or sunshine on your skin. The data that Omar presented was super interesting and super disturbing at the same time, that there's so many students who are essentially experiencing such problems. So providing those kinds of opportunities for group settings, for individual settings, trying things out in the privacy of perhaps your own room, and then being able to go and do that in more of a group setting. I mean, the thing that, and I said I should have highlighted it more, is that piece of enjoyability. We're not going to, everybody doesn't like playing basketball, or everybody doesn't like doing yoga, or doesn't like high intensity interval training, or what, but finding that thing that you find the most enjoyable, or at least things that are enjoyable to you, are the things that you're going to keep doing. So I really love the fact that you're taking this approach of providing various kinds of opportunities for the folks that are living in your properties, in your residences, to try different things and find those things that they really gravitate towards. Just super interesting and really, I don't know, I'm sure it is, I just don't know if that sort of thing is happening to the same extent here in the States. On campuses, we build these, kind of Taj Mahals of fitness, where it's the latest, greatest treadmills and strength training equipment and so on and so forth. And, you saw the data I presented earlier, less than half of our students are doing that. So that's great that many are, but there's a lot more of them that aren't doing anything, that would get them kind of the physical and mental health benefits that they so sorely need, given what Omar presented. So really interesting. I'm fascinated by that.
It sounds like there's really, we're moving towards a more accessible way of being healthy and fit, which is a really positive outcome. And I think really what I from listening to you all, I think really it's easy to put all students in one box. So saying everybody, here's a gym, if they don't go to, they don't go to, but everybody, this is where you're going to do exercise. But in actual fact, people are at different levels, have different experiences, have different needs. and being able to create a versatile experience. But I do think for going forward, cohorts change all the time, needs and expectations change. So actually, I think you're setting yourself up for a more positive risk from a risk area, being able to adapt and change, having multi-use spaces. I think it's a really positive conversation, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, Darren, would you like to quickly say something?
No, all good from my side, thank you.
I really wanted to say thank you so much, Stephen, for your presentation, and Richard and Darren for your input and conversation at the end. Thank you. I'm really apologise about the timing, everybody, blip on our side. But thank you, everybody, for joining. I hope you enjoyed. Please keep in contact. Techno Gym, thank you for, I guess, facilitating and helping curate this amazing conversation. And we're really excited to have much more coming on in the future. Hopefully we will see lots of you at our conference, where we will hopefully be setting up some cool spaces as well within the conference to carry forward some of the conversations that we've been having today. So all the best, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.